All right, well, thank you everybody for coming. This is Remote Pair Programming, a guide for distributed teams and other thoughts about remote collaboration. Since I usually give this talk and it takes about an hour, and then they asked me to bump it to an hour and a half, so we're going to talk about other stuff too. And I actually think that even if your team doesn't do remote pair programming or pair programming at all, but if you do have distributed teams, I think quite a bit of this content does translate, like say 75% to remote collaborative teams in general. Quick note on what we're going to be going over. Just a handful of things. I mostly put this up just to point out that technology is at the end. Because you're all smart people. If you're in this room, you're tech savvy in some way. And if you wanted to learn about remote pair programming technology, guess what you would Google? Remote pair programming technology. So you can figure that out. It's a lot harder to Google for having a good attitude, being patient, rolling with the frustration, working well with people, things like that. That's the hard stuff. If before you leave, if you could fill out the survey at the end, but selfishly, I have my own as well, which I've been accumulating feedback for about a year of doing this talk. It's literally one question. It's SurveyMonkey/pair programming, pair program, singular. And it's literally one question. What do you think? And you can just click and that's it. There's also a text box at the end. You can tell me how great or terrible this was and give me suggestions. I'd really appreciate it. I quite literally, and this is not a lie, I've given this talk about 8 times or so in the last year, and I change it every single time based on the feedback that I get. So hopefully it's getting better. So if it's not very good, it used to be really bad. All right, so who am I? I'm Joe Moore. I work for Pivotal Labs. We're a software consulting company. We work mostly with startups, and that's how you can get a hold of me if you'd like to. I've been pair programming since 2000. Was anybody at Jeff Patton's talk yesterday? 0. 1. Okay. Well, then I won't go into it. Anyway, I used to work with him. He outed me in that meeting. And I've been remote pair programming full-time since 2010. So that's remote pair programming, not just pair programming, but remote pair programming on video, 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, for 2 years. So first, backing up a step, what is pair programming? And don't be shy. Is there anybody who doesn't know what pair programming is? You don't have to have done it, but you know what it is? Kind of going with the assumption you do. All right. Those 2 developers working on the same problem. You know that. Solving the same problem, coding on the same workstation at the same time. These are, even if you don't believe in pair programming, people who do, these are some of the benefits, just some of the benefits that people identify as benefits of pair programming. Everything from higher quality, continuous code review. You get the picture. You probably know what these are. So what's remote pair programming? Guess what? It's the same thing, only done in some distributed fashion. So using some kind of collaborative tools to accomplish pair programming from a distance. And I think the people always ask me, like, what does this look like? What are you doing? Working from home or from the office doing this thing. So I think the best way to show you is to show you. So this is me at home. And got a big computer, got a laptop running Skype, got some external speakers and a microphone. And if you were to cut out this, well, you can't see it very well, but if you were to cut out the home stuff, like the lamps and the curtains, just kind of focus on the desk, that's pretty much what our office looks like. It's the same setup as what we have in our San Francisco or New York offices. Here I am, got a headset on. You can see the other guy there on the computer. Here's what the other end looks like. I'm usually a floating head on a laptop. We've been playing around with iPads. So this is me with sunglasses, as it turns out. I didn't know about that until somebody took a picture of it and sent it to me. So we've been playing around with Skype and an iPad. So this is an iPad in our office. And I'm going to show a couple of videos. Yes?
You always run Skype instead of your computer.
What's up?
You always run Skype or run
Do I always run it on a secondary computer? I happen to, yes. You're going to see some videos here of, so the question was, do I always run Skype on a secondary computer or something like that? The answer is yes, although for these videos, you'll actually see it running on the same computer, just get the point across. I'm going to dive deep into all that technology stuff towards the end. And if we start running out of time, I'll jump straight to it. But don't worry, we're going to go into, I've got a whole thing about video, why it's on a separate thing, should you use it? Don't worry, I'm going to get to all that stuff. Good question, though, because I talk about it. But I'm going to show a couple of videos first. So I was on an Android phone development team. We're doing an app. I was in Atlanta, Georgia. He was in San Francisco. How do you debug a physical device? And the answer is you get inventive. There's going to be some sound here, so don't be afraid.
I'm on the screen. This is just
so there was a problem when you rotated it.
Out of this, that's when it does it.
So when he rotates
okay, that makes sense.
the screen, you can see a bunch of stuff scroll by.
And I try to rotate, and it just doesn't, it never goes.
Never does it.
So this does behave the way we want it to.
That really is, I mean, I guess that's good, but it's not for, and the dialogue finishes?
Yeah, I mean, the dialogue, I mean, this is like, it just shows the normal.
So you can debug physical devices remotely if you want to. Actually, before I go on, I should have done this first. Who has teams that do remote pair programming, or did they do any kind of pair programming? Yes? Oh, awesome. Great. How about remote pairing? Yes. Right. Good stuff. So that was maybe 50% and then maybe 25% or so. It's pretty good. So here's another pairing session, me and this guy, Ryan. He was also in San Francisco. And our voices sound similar, but you can hear us both talking. So just kind of listen for that.
Analytic tracker to have received tracking events. ABCDE.
That's right.
I see.
Okay. And these tracking events are going to be the test tracking event. It says it wants 2, so I think you can actually.
Probably just duplicate that line.
That's right.
Yeah, we were going to. Make it so that it could take an arbitrary number, like just explode it out to the dot.
All right, I think you get the point of that. So what was actually going on our screen at that moment? It was this. And again, like I said, we usually run video on a separate device, but for this, I put it here so you can actually see it. And again, what's going on here isn't as important as the fact that it's a fairly seamless pairing experience. Any of you who have done pairing or have teams that pair, hopefully this will look very familiar. The dialogue back and forth, the one person typing and the other person typing, and a fairly seamless flow without a bunch of overhead of swapping technologies or something like that. And the point is that it's very seamless. It's very much the same as in-person pairing.
Expect the SPY API gateway to.
So that's Ryan talking.
Where did you put that?
He's typing in San Francisco.
To have.
Yeah, so he's typing, not me.
It's not to receive request.
Listen for
that's
this.
not on ours. Okay. I hear. Can I drive for a quick second?
Yeah.
Can I drive real quick?
I think it's actually not the.
So that was me asking, hey, can I drive real quick?
The expected
Clickety, 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 now you can hear me.
Which is, let me shift F6.
And you can hear me typing. So you can see there wasn't some big handoff or some big transition. It's just he got stuck, and I said, "Oh, I know what that is. Hold on, let me drive." There's a momentary pause as he, because I can't see him very well. That's the whole point as well. So that should give you kind of a feel. And like I said, my hope is that if you've done pair programming or observed it, that ebb and flow hopefully was pretty much what you're used to seeing two people side by side doing. It shouldn't be very different. So when might you want to do this? You may have projects that are split between multiple locations. That's obvious. You may work for a virtual company that doesn't even have an office. Does anybody work for one of these virtual companies? They're gaining in popularity. They tend to be of a size that doesn't afford them the budget to come to conferences such as this. What were you going to say?
The client I'm working for right now is 30 or 40% remote.
So your client is 30 or 40% remote. So these are becoming more popular, people working from wherever, whenever, and not even having a central office anyplace. You may have a handful of remote developers. This is my situation. So we have multiple offices, and our teams are primarily there, but there's a few of us that are remote, and we are integrated into the teams. Usually 1 or 2 per team, depending on the situation. Your developers are in India. So we'll talk about the 12-hour time shift situation. Don't get too excited about my answers. I want to hear your answers. And then you may need somebody's expertise, but you're not co-located. And you could do what many of us do, and like I say, I do this, even though I'm the remote pairing guy. You can have a 20 email thread back and forth about trying to solve some problem. I think we've all done that. Or you could actually just collaborate, semi face-to-face, just remotely. Try to solve whatever problem you're having. Now, this is really extreme. So you might do remote pair programming interviews. So at Pivotal, we're all pair programming all the time. And we not only pair as part of our work, we pair as part of our interview process. And sometimes we would like to interview people before flying them, say, halfway across the world to our office. So we conduct remote pair programming interviews as well. So I highly recommend this. If you're on teams that do pairing, to do not only pairing interviews, but you could do remote pairing interviews as well. So why do this at all? And the short answer is that all those benefits I showed before, you can get the same benefits to varying degrees, but the same benefits from remote pair programming. Let's look at those again real quick. Again, intensity, focus, knowledge transfer, all that stuff, you get those benefits from remote pairing just as you do with regular pairing. You can actually counteract some of the remote development or remote working pitfalls that I know that I would be susceptible to as somebody who works from home, for example. So let's look at a couple of those. So focus and intensity. I don't know, does anybody ever work from home? Oh, wow, almost everybody, quote unquote, works from home. Do you ever have problems with focus? You ever distracted at home? You go in your office and close the door. Good for you. I'm working from my dining room. Many of us are distracted when we're at home, where we have a different set of distractions is maybe more accurate. We're distracted at work, but maybe we're good at handling that. And then you go home and you've got, well, the laundry buzzer just buzzed, and maybe you should go switch that. And somebody knocks at the door and that kind of stuff. Just interruptions, things happen at home. Faster problem solving, not getting stuck when you're used to pairing perhaps. Knowledge transfer. This is something that I've heard people say they used to work in an office and then they started working remotely for the same company, and the company then carved off a chunk of stuff they could work on that they could basically just work on by themselves. Nobody needs to know what that is, because Bob, he's remote. We don't know what he does. He works from home, and I don't know, as long as he keeps delivering whatever it is he does. I actually talked to a guy who was in this situation, and I asked him, how do they verify what you do? Do you have any deadlines or anything? And he said, they don't really know what I do, but they seem happy with me. Oh, that's kind of crazy. So silo is a 4-letter word. We don't want to just ship people off and have them stay at home and create this little world for themselves that nobody else knows about. Do some people like it better? As crazy as it sounds, and I'm not one of these people. I prefer to be working with my colleagues in my office. But I've heard several people say they like it better. And it's maybe a one-off situation, but these are people that I work with, and they've said, after pairing with me throughout the day, they've said, I kind of like this better, because they actually get more focus. They usually have some kind of headset on, and they kind of focus in on what we're working on, and they're less distracted by kind of all the stuff around them. And just to be clear, I'm not advocating for remote pair programming as a replacement for what in-person pair programming. I'm not telling everybody to send all their developers home and tell them to buy a headset. If you can get people collaborating at work together, face to face, with whiteboards and all that kind of stuff, and I'll talk about that, then you should be doing that. But if that's not an option, this is an option. So how do you do this? And the thing I want to stress, and I've already alluded to this, is that it's so much about the people. It's so much about who you are and how you interact. The technology stuff, yeah, there's laptops and Skype and all that jazz. And like I said, you're all smart and you can figure that stuff out. But the people aspect, and this is where it translates over to regular pair programming, in-person pairing, and remote collaboration in general, it's a lot about people. Because you can't fix a team of tools with tools. Number one, patience. Things are going to go wrong. All of us have had our internet crash, our computers crash, flaky internet, Skype, you name it. There's things happen. And you lose, I mentioned this a little bit later, but I mentioned this concept of fidelity, where being face to face, and I can see your eyes, and I can see your hands, and I can see your everything very well, and we're talking and laughing and whatever. It's like a high fidelity experience, face to face. And you lose some of that fidelity when you're remote. And with that comes delays and just little things creep in. And having patience to roll with that is really important. So if you're the kind of person, or you have a team of people, and you might have somebody who, whenever something crashes on their computer, they flip out. Well, this may not be the best thing for them, or they may need to learn to kind of roll with the punches a bit. You need to be able to express your ideas clearly and concisely. Like I said, high fidelity, lower fidelity. You can still get pretty high, but all those little things, slow internet, maybe you can't type as fast as you would like to. Maybe you can't see the person's face as well. You need to be able to talk things out. So being the strong, silent type is not a great situation for pairing in general. Remote pairing, it's even worse. You need really, really good pairing etiquette. Who knows what pairing etiquette is? It's kind of a, Elizabeth knows, George, you know.
I can guess.
You can guess.
Asking somebody if you can use the keyboard. Can I take over?
Right. Asking somebody if you can use the keyboard. Thanks. I'll give you that $5 afterwards. Doing things like asking, do you mind if I drive? You heard me say that in that video. It went fast, but I did it. Saying, I'm going to grab the mouse, warning them that there's something you want to do. Can I look at something? Just letting them know you would like to do something. And both sides doing this, not just the work from home guy, but the work at the office lady. And also, telling somebody that they could drive. That's a good idea as well. This concept of driving, that's whoever's on the mouse and keyboard. You may be stuck, and the other person's not jumping in. And they maybe can't tell that you're stuck because they can't see you very well. They can't see that you're sitting back with your arms folded or whatever. And you may say, yeah, go ahead. I use this for a different reason, though. Because it's somewhat common, especially at first, when I'm kind of getting somebody into it, that they will get excited about something and grab the mouse and keyboard and go and look at something and say, oh, I know how to fix that, and they kind of take over, and I was in the middle of doing something. And then I'll say, oh, yeah, go ahead, you go ahead and try. To which they usually respond, oh, sorry, hey, were you done? I was like, no, but we'll get to it. Go ahead. I know it's maybe a little passive, but it's a teaching opportunity. And pretty soon, they get the hang of it. And so I usually have a little preamble at the beginning of a remote pairing session with somebody that I've never remote paired with before. And I'll usually say, hi, hey, we're going to remote pair today. And I will often know them, but maybe we've just never remote paired. And I'll say things like, we can't see each other's hands and arms very well, so we can't really see mouse and keyboard. So I'll often say, do you mind if I drive? Or, can I grab the mouse? And things like that, just to let you know that I would like to kind of get in there. And I encourage you to do the same with me. And it kind of sets a tone of civility and awareness. And I've talked to people since who have said that they actually use that in face-to-face pairing. It actually raised their awareness of the way they pair in general, which was not my intent. I mean, it's great. It wasn't my original intention. My original intention was kind of selfish, which was people keep jacking the mouse. How do I tell them to stop doing that in a civil, nice way? Having a supportive operations and infrastructure team can be important. Your organization might be wired to the gills. You may have remote people all over the place, and that's great. Happy for you. But if you're somebody like me who works from home occasionally, or like I work from home all the time, but having people who say work from home or work from a remote office or something like that, your operations and infrastructure team may have to jump through some hoops for them. Maybe they need some special VPN access. Maybe they need faster internet, and it's just for them or for the 5 people in that situation. And having those supportive people is really great. You know, some people may say, well, if we had 100 people doing this, no problem. But for 5, it's too much work. And that's a valid situation that might happen. Having a good attitude, just in general, whatever that means, having a good attitude on both sides of the remote fence, so to speak. So people are working from home and the office, good attitude. 2 people working from from big offices remotely, having a good attitude, just rolling with things. So like, for example, we used to, so you saw me pairing with my video on a laptop. We used to run the video like on a bigger screen. And the guy I was pairing with in the office, he would swap the backgrounds and hover my head over various backgrounds. So like here, I think I'm the King of England. Then I shaved my beard, which I became the Queen of England. I have access to all those computers, so I wasn't going to stand for that, so I had to make that better. You know, and that leads us to things like camaraderie, right? You're stuck somewhere else, or you know, even if you, like I said, I tend to talk a lot about you know, me being at home and other people being in the office, but that's not everybody's situation. You could have big offices full of people who are still remote pairing together, and I've been in that situation as well. But hey, camaraderie. So here's, you know, end of day, let's have a beer. Cheers, Joe. And they could have just shut the laptop lid and walked away, but they didn't. You know, they put forth that extra effort. It's that extra effort that makes so much difference. It makes me feel so much better. It makes them feel good. You know, that kind of thing. So generous and understanding team members. So like I said, we've been playing around with an iPad, and instead of leaving me on the desk when we need to go get an answer from somebody, they pick the thing up and trounce across the office with it. Sorry for the shaky cam action. So Dave in our office, he could have just left me there, but he didn't. And you'll catch me doing this. I'll say me. He picked me up and walked me around the office. I can't help it. After a while, it's like, that's me. And people will in a complimentary fashion, will say, maybe we'll have a stand-up. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But maybe we'll have a stand-up, and somebody needs to talk to me afterwards. And they'll say, okay, well, I'll go find you and talk to you after stand-up. Okay, just like you would, you know, in the office, except I'm not there. They're going to walk over to this machine and find me there. So there I am, me, right? You know, clearly we like beer at Pivotal. Here's what you've learned. Pivotal, beer. You know, here's another end of the day. We're hanging out. We have an end of day stand-up on some projects, and here's Nate carrying the iPad around, and I was recording this when we were all hanging out and, you know, drinking a beer. Right. Let me go back to that. So what's the point? Fuzzy heads, you know, floating heads on top of funny bodies? Like, no. Like, you get the point. It's the camaraderie and the fun and things like that. Yes, Elizabeth?
So I've done remote pairing at Citadel, and I just wanted to reflect back what you're saying and say that it became like my coworker had the bizarre disability of not having a corporeal body. But just like we would accommodate wheelchairs, we accommodate our non-corporeal friends by having mechanisms like this to include them.
That's a really interesting way of putting it. So Elizabeth said that they just don't have a body. It's not that they're not there, they just don't have a body. And it's almost, you made an analogy just now, which I had never heard. Brilliant. Brilliant. Which is, it's almost like somebody's disabled. You know, maybe they have a wheelchair and they need additional help with that. And well, instead of being maybe mobily impaired. I'm locationally impaired. I'm geographically disabled, geographically challenged, registered trademark. And having people who are willing to help with that situation makes a big difference. Imagine you worked someplace where somebody wouldn't hold the door open for somebody who was in a wheelchair. That'd be terrible. I think that attitude translates in some way, shape, or form to this kind of thing. So do's and don'ts. Like, what are some things to keep in mind when you're doing this throughout the day? So do's, you'll hear me say this a bunch of times. Be patient, roll the punches. And this goes on both sides of no matter who, you're remote or not, or maybe you're both remote, but be assertive about being included. And I'm an assertive person in this way. Often people will come up to our station where we are remote pairing, and they'll say, this is maybe in the office and I'm away, and somebody comes up and says, hey, can I talk to you guys about something? And often they'll just forget that I am on a headset or that they are on a headset. And I'll have to say, hey, can you unplug the headphones so that I can talk through the speakers? And on the flip side, if you're the office person in that case, try to be aware of the fact that that person is there. You may have to turn the speakers on or off or something like that, just taking them into consideration. Take breaks. Like our office has ping pong. Go play ping pong. You're not stuck. A funny situation where I was pairing with a guy. He was fairly new. He just graduated from college. And I was remote pairing with him, and he seemed to be getting more and more nervous. Just seemed uncomfortable. It was kind of getting worse and worse. And eventually I said, are you okay? Is everything okay? And he finally said, I really need to pee. And it's like, oh, okay. Please go pee. Go take 10 minutes and come back, and I'll go do the same. So it was something I had never considered, but there was something about putting on the headset, and there was a kind of a lock-in that he thought had happened. Normally when you're in an office, you need to go get a cup of coffee or what have you. Then you just go and do it. You say, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee. All right, cool. But there's something about putting on the headphones, and I've talked to other people, and they had the similar situations where they felt like they were locked in. We're doing this thing. And so please take breaks. And I've tried to make an effort of at least a couple times an hour saying, hey, do you mind if we take 5? I'm going to go get a drink of water, stretch my legs. Like, oh, yeah, cool. And that person never stays there. They're always like, yeah, definitely. And they put down the headphones and walk away as well. So everybody needs breaks. And I am a big proponent of video, especially at first. And so we have some teams at Pivotal who remote pair a lot, and they don't use video. They find that they no longer get a lot out of that. And that's fine. But I really encourage people, if you can, at the beginning at least, use video. Have that face-to-face interaction. Don'ts, kind of opposite of some of those other ones. Try not to exclude the remote person from conversations or meetings. Meetings, seems like that's kind of a solved problem in many cases. A lot of people have video conferencing in a meeting room. But those side conversations, somebody walking up and saying, hey, I need to talk to you guys, may take a little bit of extra effort to include that remote person. But please do it. It makes a big difference. Please don't be the strong silent type. Like I said, you lose some of that fidelity. It's harder to pick up on those little physical cues of what's going on, so try to talk things out. And you heard me in those videos doing a lot of talking, so much that it really annoys me to hear myself talk that much, but I think it's important. Please don't just walk away. We've had this happen with clients of ours who were not so into remote pairing, as it turns out. They didn't like video, and there were multiple instances where they'd be working on some problem, talking it through, and one of our person would say like, oh, so what do you think about such and such? Silence. Hello? Hello? 10 minutes later, there's like a rustle, the microphone. Oh yeah, I walked away. Thanks. So please don't do that. And I can't believe I have to say this, but it's happened so many times that I'm going to say it. If you're wearing a headset and you would like to leave, please don't lay your headset on the keyboard. Many, many times, I would say once every 2 weeks or so. You know, we say, hey, let's take 5. Okay, cool. Plop, walk away, and the screen is going pages and pages, and I can't do anything. What am I going to do? I'm 2,000 miles away. And they come back and say, oh, whoops. Oh, it's weird, but it happens all the time. I can't explain it. So FYI. So regarding video, you asked about video. Do we run it on a separate machine? And the answer is yes. Probably for convenience of just kind of having it's kind of funny to say, for convenience we have an extra thing. That's usually not the way it works. But there is something about having like this video on this other thing, kind of deal with it separately. You can turn it off if you would like. There's not a lot of application switching and things like that. People seeing themselves floating around on the computer you're using to work. It kind of makes the development machine the development machine and not also a video machine. Nowadays it's not so bad, but once upon a time resources were an issue. You know, video would actually slow down your development machine, and geeks want as much power as they can get, so please don't slow down the development machine. But like I've said, I want this high fidelity experience, and a little bit of, I should have talked about this at the beginning maybe, but a little bit of my personal history is I worked for Pivotal for almost 7 years, and for the first 5 of those, I worked in the office all the time in this super XP, extreme programming, to the gills, all pairing, all the time environment. And then my wife decided to quit her career and go to medical school, which I was in full support of. And anybody who knows the way medical school and medical careers work, to get to be a doctor, you have to usually move a bunch of times. And let's say at least 3 times over your course of your medical schooling. So medical school, then residency, and sometimes in the middle of that residency, there's multiple moves there, kind of depending on what you're doing. So I was going to be moving a lot. So it was really hard for me. It was really hard to lose that environment that I loved so much. So my big goal is to try to recreate that if I can, to take the distance and collapse it, make it almost like I'm there and that they are with me as well. So that's why I use this high fidelity concept, and anything that kind of degrades that, I'm always trying to counteract it. So seeing smiling faces is a great thing. If you work in an office, you probably, hopefully, see smiling faces on a regular basis. This just isn't quite the same. So let's play a game. Let's play a game called What's Going On? This is the only audience participation that you're kind of required to do. You don't have to. And also to that point, feel free to just shout out questions and everything and make suggestions as we go along. There's definitely going to be time at the end for lots of discussion, and I'm really interested in what people who have remote teams of their own, what you use to have as high fidelity experience as possible. Well, let's play a game called What's Going On? So let's say you've been working on a problem. Even if you're not a developer, you can imagine. You're working on a problem. It's pretty hard. You both are pretty tired. Trying to figure it out, it's tough. And then there's silence on the other end of the microphone. What's going on? All right, what's going on from this? Okay, of course. Nobody knows. You have no idea. How about this guy? What's he doing? His wife is yelling at him. Okay. Any other things? He's looking at something. Very good. That's what I interpret from this. I see somebody, and my eyes become very trained to this, because this is like my world, right? This box is my window into the other person. Yes? He could be looking at some code. Exactly. That's exactly the way I interpret this. I see somebody who's he's leaned forward intently. I can't see his arms, but there's something, his posture seems to indicate that he's forward. Maybe he's got his hand on the mouse and keyboard, and nothing's happening there, but maybe he's about to. So this tells me, well, Jake's very intently looking at what we're both looking at, because we're both looking at the same shared code at the same time. Is that the same as the previous thing? Not really. But, yeah, this guy is still looking at code, you're right. And we've all looked at code like this, or smelled code like this. Yeah, and it doesn't work. Oh, he's definitely looking at my code. But that's different, right? He's confused. This is almost kind of inviting, like, let's talk about this. This was a little bit different. Watching me code, maybe. Let's say we weren't both coding, but it could be. That's funny, because that leads directly to what you just said. What I see in particular are his hands. He has his arms folded. And anybody who's done pairing, if you're leaned forward and you're working on something and you get kind of stuck and kind of do that kind of lean back and like, you're thinking about it, that almost instantly the other person is like, they get in there. Because that ebb and flow of pairing is very much of, in my experience, somebody's kind of like, they're really on it. And this cycle can be like a minute, or it can be 5 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds, who knows? It's a variable. You're kind of up, and you're like, yeah, I'm getting it, and you kind of hit the peak, and then all of a sudden you get stuck on something. And the other person says like, oh yeah, I know this. That was on that other project I was on, and they kind of take over and they kind of go up, and then they kind of fade as they get stuck, and then that's when the other person kind of jumps in. And that ebb and flow of pairing is a really awesome thing. It's the reason I do it. If you've experienced it or seen it at least. And one of the cues is when somebody's kind of stuck or losing their kind of flow, they kind of like often unconsciously just fold their hands. So that's a cue to me to like, oh, maybe I should jump in there. What's this guy doing? He's texting, of course. He's looking at his phone. So without video, he could have been intently looking at something at which I should wait, or he could be texting his girlfriend. Who knows? All right, what's this guy doing? All right, he's not there. He walked away. So you get the point. A lot of people say they don't use video when pairing or remote pairing, and I just get so much out of it, and it's for these kind of reasons. Yes? Camera placement. I usually just have it off to the side. That question was recommendations on where to put the camera. I usually just have the laptop kind of off to the side for, one, you can kind of see the person's profile, and so if it's a little bit further away, you can sometimes see whether or not they're scratching their face, or their arms are folded, or they're leaned back, or something like that. You wouldn't want just this. It's not quite as high fidelity. You're not getting as much. People have suggested, and I've never done this, but trying to rig like an overhead kind of camera so you can see the whole person sounds interesting, but I just haven't ever done that kind of thing. Challenges. So it's not all unicorns and rainbows. What are some of the challenges of remote pairing? Easy answer, because my theme is that you get all the benefits. You can get all the benefits of in-person pairing, and you can kind of collapse that distance and make it so that you're almost like it's not remote anymore. Well, if that's the case, you get all the same challenges as you do with in-person pairing. So if the person you're working with is a jerk, a person is still a jerk. If they're a keyboard hog and they never let you type, you're probably going to have that kind of thing going on too. All the same stuff. The only one you escape is BO. And anybody who's done remote pairing before has probably experienced cleanliness challenged fellow developers. You're off the hook on that one. This one's an interesting one, especially for maybe organizations that have traditional work from home, quote unquote work from home workforces, is it can lack some of that traditional work from home benefits, at least when you're full-time remote pairing, which is really rare, or during that remote pairing session. Because a lot of people, they might, and this is totally valid, I'm not saying you shouldn't do this, because I think it's awesome. You may work remotely because you have family obligations. You may need to take care of your kids, take care of a loved one, run errands during the day. that might just be the way your body cycle is. Maybe you're a work at night kind of person. And that's totally great. But in order to have pair programming, you're going to have that dedicated time, that dedicated overlap with whoever it is you're working with. So maybe you're across multiple time zones and you have a 4-hour overlap during the day. You may decide as a team you're going to always be available during that time. And that may mean you can't run to the dry cleaners during that time, or you have to take extra time to do that, something like that. Lacking shared facilities, I really miss this kind of stuff. And this is kind of one of the elephants in the room, especially if you are doing the cards on a whiteboard kind of thing versus using some kind of software planning tool or something. So whiteboards, note cards, the lunch area, I miss this stuff a lot. The lunch area, the hallway conversations, the striking up a conversation when you're getting coffee. I miss that. And there are, web-based whiteboard solutions and things like that. And you can Google web-based whiteboard and you'll find a bunch of them. iPad whiteboard, you'll find a bunch of them. But there's nothing, this doesn't replace like 50 feet of whiteboard. Just nothing that replaces that.
People bring you around once they rent that, and you can see their whiteboard. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, what about just taking the laptop or the whatever has the camera and holding it up to the whiteboard? That can work. I was on a project where we were doing development for a piece of software that actually ran on a television. Like TVs nowadays are basically computers. So this was something like that, and they were very strict on that there could only be one of these TVs in the office. Like I couldn't have one in Atlanta and such. So they would take the laptop, it wasn't an iPad at the time, it was a laptop, and they would hold it up to the television to say like, look, this thing isn't quite aligned, look, and they would hold it up. That actually worked great. It definitely ties back into having people with good attitudes and supportive and things like that. I mean, imagine like carrying out a laptop and holding it up to things all the time. That's a burden on you if you're the person doing all that extra, literally legwork. So that can work, that can help, but it's not it's in the literal sense of the word term, like that's definitely a lower fidelity, like the picture isn't going to be as clear, things like that. So that can work, but it's still frustrating. I end up doing this kind of stuff quite a bit, just writing on a note card at home and holding it up to the camera, but then the other person can't really edit. What we often will find ourselves doing, even if we'd prefer not to, is falling back on some kind of software, web-based solution. So up there, that's a continuous integration monitor showing the status of different projects that's accessible to me from the outside as well as the people inside. So I can see if we have broken things. Google Docs, we use Google Docs for just about everything. Retrospective notes. Maybe normally you'd be drawing it on a whiteboard. We very often will be in a meeting room instead that has a big whiteboard, and somebody is transcribing what is being written on the whiteboard into a Google Doc, something like that. And this is a project, this is an Agile project management tool. We use that. It is made by Pivotal Labs. It's called Pivotal Tracker. Give it a try. But when you get down to it, nothing necessarily replaces giant whiteboards with tacked-on notes, and I love that. But if you have a distributed team, you may have to fall back on finding these kind of solutions. Oh yeah, so I showed you debugging a phone earlier. You have to get inventive about stuff. Constraints cause innovation, such as holding a phone up to a camera. Time zones.
Just two? No. Yeah. Getting there. Yeah.
There we go. So 2's not convenient. 3, even worse. I did that for 6 months. I moved to Atlanta from California, and I chose, it was my decision, to work a shifted schedule. So I worked from noon to 9 p.m. And when I worked from San Francisco again, about a year later, we came up with more of a compromise. And we actually had some people who wanted to come to work early and get off early. And so on those days, I would pair with that person. I would get off early. A lot of people ask me about this. And I just don't have a good answer for this.
Well, it's only 2 people. You can't be in 12 time zones.
2 people be in 12 time zones. Well, if you're trying to pair with an expert who's in India, that makes it hard.
12 time zones away, not 12 different time zones.
True. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, you could in theory have people in 12 time zones. That would be hard. But I think that this tends to apply to a lot of people who have offshore teams. You know, you've got people in India or something like that, and how do you remote pair with those people? And you know, there's no silver bullet here. It's people shifting their schedules and such. I would suggest if you go in whole hog on this and you have a lot of people, is you can try to kind of stripe by time zones. You know, you could have your East Coast people remote pairing together and your West Coast people remote pairing together, and maybe that changes, you know, that could have bigger impacts though. You know, that could change the way you structure projects. That could change responsibilities and things like that. So, you know, there's no silver bullet here. It's just hard. Maybe I'll take a minor little step to the side to reflect on some conversations that I've had recently here at this conference, with people asking me, well, what do you do when you have a distributed team? You want to have a distributed agile team, and your team in India doesn't have a product owner, and you're the product owner here in the US. And this is an area that I will admit I'm not an expert on. There may be people in this room that far exceed my expertise in this area. But it sounds like what you said, editing out some of the words, is I have an agile team with no product owner. So I don't know how you solve that problem of having your product owner or other important people that comprise an agile team not being so far away. Right. So you're doing a session tomorrow and get a product owner in India. Mm-hmm.
The product owner in India likely doesn't have the same level of business knowledge as the product owner in the US.
You need to transfer that. So you need to make those people able to operate independently, at least most of the time.
Right.
So normally what we do is we end up writing additional requirements and more documentation to overcome the communication. Our clients aren't going to move to India.
Mm-hmm. Right. So just to sum that up, you're saying, if you have a product, if you're missing product owners on your Indian team, transfer knowledge to product owners on your Indian team.
We do product proxy, or product owner proxies as well.
And you have product owner proxies, and also write a lot of extra documentation to try to support that. So it sounds like your session will be awesome tomorrow, because I will probably be there.
So how often do you code without being paired?
How often do we in general, or myself?
In general.
In general, how often do we pair? Do we code without pairing? At Pivotal, which is on the extreme end of this scale, the answer is almost never. If we have enough developers on a project to make it even pairings, we pair 40 hours a week. But in reality, you know, but we're not like, oh, somebody was sick, so we're odd, so that other person is pair sick, and they should just go home. We're not crazy, all right? We're not crazy. So people, you know, we'll try to share the load. So it's a common thing where maybe we have an 8-person project and somebody goes on vacation for a week. And so you'll take turns. There'll be a different person soloing each day, or maybe do half days or something like that.
Compensation for the code that wasn't written paired for like design and code reviews and things. We go back and revisit that code.
Oh, do we revisit the soloed code? I would say fairly often we do. We don't have a built-in process for that. Like, you're a solo today, so therefore by the end of the day you have to have a code review. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. I think that our project sizes happen to be that everybody's kind of all over everybody's code all the time, and so any issues in those areas will probably be fleshed out. But on larger projects, that might be a good idea. Your solo people should perhaps, before they do a check-in, call somebody, you know, get somebody else to help them, or to other people to do code reviews. It's not a bad idea.
The other thing I've seen is that when you're solo, if you work on more stuff like design specs or fixing bugs or, you know, adding CSS, things that don't need quite so heavily much of a review as, you know, core code that's a different person.
Right. So perhaps your solo people should work on things that the group has decided are more soloable, less risky, less design intent and such. That's a good idea as well. And we'll do that. Like we'll have the, and you have to be a bit balanced here because you could have solo guy today, you're the bug squasher. And you hunt, you look at the backlog for the bugs and maybe you cherry pick some of them, but you should probably, if you find something that it turns out is a really deep, complex issue, maybe skip that one until you're pairing. Technology gremlins. We're all in high tech. We all probably have some kind of computer or phone on us, and we all know how these things go. You just have to roll with the punches. Flaky internet, firewalls, Skype, bad software in general, broken hardware, that's no fun. Your router blows up at home. Well, now you're screwed.
Skype goes, just a little problem.
I have my occasional issues with Skype. But why do I use Skype is the next question, and I'll tell you later. The answer is, of course, because everybody has Skype. So I kind of alluded to this. If you're working from home and doing remote pairing, you may need to get quite savvy with your home network. You may not want to do this, but you may have to, or it may be very wise to. Things like trying to eke out that little bit extra fidelity from Skype, for example. How do you make Skype better? And if you Google for how to make Skype faster, then you'll find, well, if you tweak this little thing here and this little thing there, and you get into your router and blah, 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 you can make it better. And if you're just pairing occasionally, yeah, maybe that's not such a big deal. If you're doing it 40 hours a week, well, this makes a big difference. And other things like if you work from home and you have a traditional home network setup, and you would like to host the pairing session, you would like to be able to share your screen with people. Or if you're doing really technical stuff, maybe people need to actually open a terminal session on your machine, SSH in to your machine at home, if you know what that means. Then you will almost definitely have to do something to your home network to allow that kind of thing, because normally routers don't let that in because that lets anybody in. You have to configure that kind of thing. Maybe the Geek Squad can do it for you, I don't know. Maybe your operations people are really nice and generous, like I alluded to earlier, and they may be able to help you with whatever thing you bought, or send you a pre-configured thing. That would be great. But it's overhead. What about all these things? Meetings and stand-ups and scrums and planning sessions and all that kind of stuff. And I actually find that this is usually not where the problems are. This, in my opinion, is, for the most part, a kind of a solved problem. I'm sorry if you guys are still struggling with this. I'm not saying everybody is solved in every situation, but this is just a smattering of different group video solutions we've used. That's iChat up there for Mac. That's Google Hangouts. This is good old Skype. This is somebody's laptop, I think, there. That's something else. This is a meeting room that has a camera wired up and a computer and stuff. So these kind of things, doing group video is kind of a solved thing for right now, I feel, and there are multiple free solutions in this area. Some work better than others. I encourage you to try a bunch. What you're not going to see a lot from me in any of these slides is anything that's Windows-based, because we're a Mac shop. So I encourage, when we get to the technology stuff especially, and I'm listing bunches of stuff, please tell me if you're in a Windows environment, what you guys are using nowadays, because it may be worth integrating that kind of technology into the setup. What is the Death Star is the question. That is so there's one there, and one there, and one there. And that is an external microphone. High quality external microphone. It's by a company named Blue. If you're into music, you may have heard of Blue. They make super high quality microphones for the music industry. And they've gotten into making computer mics as well. And that's called a Snowball. Maybe because there's a white one, but that one's silver and that's a black one. And they're really awesome. I recommend them. We have them all over our office. And when we get to the part where I'm showing you my setup at home, you'll see one on my desk as well.
So do you only pair with people within your own company, or do you ever pair with clients?
Do I pair with my clients as well as people at Pivotal? And the answer is yes, we do.
So what kind of technology do your
So we figure out when we're pairing with clients and we need to figure out like what we're going to use, that's a whole sort of negotiation that has to happen. You know, what are they comfortable with? What am I comfortable with? It kind of ties into remote pair interviewing kind of stuff, kind of figuring out what the level playing field is. Ideally, they're on exactly the same stack as we are. And if they're not, well, you have to kind of figure out kind of what's the highest common denominator, shall we say.
I can see me walking into a client saying, we want to be pair programming, I need to get some really big monitors.
Right. Like telling our clients to drop thousands or tens of thousands of dollars in equipment maybe won't fly. Just expense that.
No, yes. Just a little modeling would be fine.
So you guys are all totally inspired, and you're going to go to your teams back at your office, and you're going to say, Joe, you're going to remote pair today. Okay, so now what? Watch out, it's a list. This is my own personal list. If you're in a situation where you're going to be remote pairing, all these slides will be available later, so you don't have to scribble down if you don't want to. But from a practical point of view, here's some things that would be good. Find a headset, a microphone with a microphone with a headset. Figure out who you're going to be working with and exchange Skype account information or whatever your remote video collaboration of choice is. Hopefully with video. Call the other person and then spend a few minutes just talking about whether or not you've ever done this before. I'm often in a situation where I have done a lot of remote pairing and the other person hasn't. Maybe neither one has ever done this before. That's good to get on the table. Maybe both of you are super experienced, you've done this a lot, so just like whatever, skip the rest of it. You know how it goes. But just talk about it. And with the video thing, with somebody you've never worked with before perhaps, or you haven't worked with them in a long time, this is your first remote pairing experience with them, get that video going, look them in the eye, and have a conversation. It makes a big difference. They're not just like a nebulous somebody on the other side of the camera or computer. And then there's, more complicated stuff, I guess. Agree on your operating system and editor and development setup and such. Like that could take a while. Hopefully you already know some of this. You just sit down and pick a random person and say, so are you on Windows or Mac? It's going to be a long conversation. Hopefully you kind of know, but you might not. You may be doing a pairing interview like I described, and you may not know what they've got going on. You got to figure out your options. And I'll talk about how to, when you have totally really disparate technologies, how you figure out stuff that works. And then choose a screen sharing technology, of which there are many that we'll go over, and give it a try. And if it doesn't work, try another one. Yes?
The screen sharing, based on your experience, do you just prefer to literally, here's my screen, I'm sharing it, I'm in control, and then when it goes to the other person, they share their screen they have?
Right. So what are the logistics of actually doing screen sharing and swapping back and forth?
Because some of us really choose the screen sharing option.
Oh my God, you're such a good setup person.
Go and literally touch what's on there to take control.
Yes. Hold that thought about how logistics of screen sharing and whether or not you should trade back and forth and only one person control or both control. Hold that thought. We're going to talk a lot about it really soon. We're almost there. There's even a rant. Just wait. It's going to be good stuff. So your remote pairing today, remember the do's and don'ts that we went over earlier, like being patient and including the other person? Let's say you're doing this really crazy hippie voodoo stuff of remote pairing interviews. What do you do then? Hey, we have this guy in Russia. We think he's really cool. He phone interviewed well, but we're not sure if we want to fly him across the world quite yet to see if he'd be a good fit. This is a great way to figure out if he would be a good fit, or she. So what do you do in this situation? And this is quite literally what I do in this situation, is I think about all that other stuff that we listed earlier. And then I send a setup email, like a day ahead of time, and I'll show you that. And I also consider, you had asked about screen sharing technologies, I consider, we'll go over this, but a browser-based screen sharing technology, which is a fancy way of saying the easiest thing to kind of get going, even though it has limitations. They're usually cross-platform, not necessarily awesome, but everybody has a browser, and you can usually get going pretty quickly without a lot of install and things like that. So I don't expect you to remember all of this, but this is kind of an example of what I would send to somebody. Like, hi, I'm Joe. We're going to be remote parenting tomorrow. Got a couple questions. What is your Skype ID, stranger? What operating system are you using? Are you on Mac or what? If you're both on Macs, that expands your options. If you're both on Windows, that expands your options. If one's on Linux and the other's on Windows, you're going to have to kind of figure out what works there. What is your screen resolution? Getting into some real practical stuff now. If you saw the computers we were using earlier, they're giant 27-inch machines. You might be interviewing somebody who's using like a netbook. And I don't know if that's making much noise. You may want to change your resolution to match theirs because you're doing something they've probably never done before. They may never have paired, and if they haven't paired, they've definitely never remote paired. And you might want to, let me try this side. You want to make it as easy for them as possible. I guess I'll just stand in the middle. All right, what kind of questions do we have about all that stuff? I talked a lot, blah, blah, blah. And you guys have been really patient when you ask about technology. And I tell you I ask you, hopefully kindly, to hold the thought until we get to all of that. Because in my experience, once you start getting into tech, boy, that's it. It's all tech all the time. Because we all really want to talk about it. And it's the first thing I ask. Oh, you remote pair? Yeah. Oh, what do you use? Tell me. Really want to talk about stuff really bad. It's some of my favorite stuff, but this other stuff is so important that I wanted to make sure we covered it. So, thoughts about this kind of stuff? Questions? Good to go? Oh, yes. Yeah, what's our interview process at Pivotal? That's a great question. And the answer is we have a short kind of screening exercise that we do just to make sure that they have programmed ever in their life. Some people are just like, this is easy. It's just like writing an email. And then assuming that that goes well, what we don't do is we don't go to a whiteboard and draw a bunch of boxes and we don't say, resort this list of numbers in some crazy way. I'm clear, you can see I'm not very big fan of that kind of stuff. What we do is we say, welcome. There's a project going on over here. Here's Joe. Sit down and work for the day. That's our interview process. Do I want to sit next to this person for 8 hours a day? Or if they can't do 8 all at once, half the day. Do I want to sit next to this person? What kind of questions do they ask? Even if they don't know the technology, and this happens often, that we're working on something, and this person, they've never coded in this kind of language before. They've done some other stuff, but not this. So they're not going to be picking out syntax errors. But this is a little bit off the topic, but I think it's really important, is pairing interviews are, in my opinion, the best way to figure out if you actually want to work with this person and what they're qualified to do. You can pick up really quickly, even if they don't know this stuff, do they seem like they can pick it up quickly? Are they asking interesting questions, given that they don't know it? I love lobbing out kind of lofty questions and seeing what they say. We're big into TDD, test-driven development. We write tests for everything, and we'll be working on some tests, and I'll say like, I could, sorry for the jargon bit, but we could use a mock here, or we could not use a mock. What do you think? And if they look at me blankly, that's interesting to know. If they have really strong opinions on one side or the other, then that's good to know. It's a great way of figuring out if this person is going to be a good fit or not. And equally important, it's really important for them to find out that they hate pairing. I mean, how do you hire people to pair program at your organization without pairing with them first. Because they may say like, yeah, sounds great. And then they drop in and they're like, okay, well, where are my headphones? You know, find out if they actually want to pair before you hire them. Sorry, long-winded, quite passionate about that topic. I don't know if you can tell. All right, let's get to it. The tech. Finally, technology. What do I download? Tell me. Well, there's going to be problems. So I recommend, if you're in offices, this is often not an issue. If you are in an office, this is surprisingly a common issue. We had a problem with this. Turns out in New York City, terrible internet. I don't know if you guys have a New York office. If you're in a newer part of town, you've probably got awesome internet. If you're in an older part of town, you've got like telegraph wires or something going on, and they won't get in anything faster. Like they can't. We would have to tear up New York City to put in a fiber line to your place. So if you can get fast internet, but this applies to home. Like I upgraded my home internet when I started doing this. I've got really fast home internet. But the upload bandwidth is key if you're doing the hosting. Meaning if I'm at home, darn it, gotta stop touching that. If I'm at home and I'm hosting the pair programming session, that means that I'm pushing lots of data to whoever's on the other end. And and I may have really awesome download. And that seems to be the way most of these things work. You know, you want to stream a movie? Sure. Are you uploading a movie? Of course not. But anyway, you know, most data plans, you know, or internet plans, you know, it's like 10 megabits down and 1 megabit up. And that's great for downloading, but not for pushing lots of data to your person on the other end. And so I upgraded mine, and I have like 60 down and 10 up or something like that, and that's great. Remember wired networks? None of you are using them now. It turns out they're fast, real fast, and quite reliable. So if you're in an office environment and you have a choice between Wi-Fi and wired, I would go wired. And I even at home have wired. I said get savvy with your home network. Set up a wired network if you can. It's going to be more reliable. You know, when somebody microwaves something, you're not going to lose your session with your buddy. So VPNs. Everybody, raise your hand if you do not know what a VPN is. Great. So very likely, if you're connecting to somebody or somebody's connecting to you, you're going to have some security. You're going to have to work with your ops department to get the VPN stuff worked out. It's good to get worked out ahead of time if you can. Screen sharing. This is the big one, like Skype and all that kind of stuff. I mean, if you had to, you could make a telephone call and talk to somebody. The screen sharing stuff, like that's the big one. How do you actually share a screen and work on the same problem at the same time as if you were sitting next to each other? And there's a lot of options here. And I'm going to go through some of them. I have some recommendations. I don't expect you to memorize everything, but and I want to hear what you use, especially if you're in a Windows environment or a Linux environment and you don't use what I'm about to show. They kind of fall into two broad categories. One is desktop screen sharing, and that is quite literally sharing your computer desktop. So you kind of see the whole thing. And if somebody were playing a movie on it, you'd see the movie, that kind of thing. The other one is terminal-based. This is getting pretty geeky. You know, you're using a text-based. It's not literally screen sharing, but you're sharing a session using a terminal-based technology, which we'll go over. Here's just a few of the many screen sharing technologies. Many of you are probably saying, well, what about whatever? And yeah, that would be up here too. If I had just found a logo for it. There's lots of different stuff, and there are different things to consider when you're looking at that big list or anything. And I kind of think about these four things. And this gets to your question earlier about two-way control, one-way control kind of a thing. Are they cross-platform? So does it matter if you're on a Mac or Windows or whatever? Does it require a VPN? Because some of them, there's some screen sharing technologies I've never seen blocked by a VPN. May I ask why I was not using a VPN? Prefer not to answer that question. Do they run in a web browser? Because that's kind of the quickest way to get going. Everybody has a web browser. Those usually don't get blocked. But they're often limited in functionality or slow. And do they allow two-way control, or are they really a presentation software? Like, here, I'm going to share my screen. Well, really, really what you're doing is I am presenting my screen to you, and you just have to watch. Don't memorize all this. The point I'm trying to make with this is all the same things I showed you earlier, and there's quite a smattering of combinations here. Everything from proprietary things like iChat, they run only on a Mac, but not in a web browser, but they kind of punch through VPNs pretty easily, and they allow two-way control. There's some stuff down here, Google Hangouts and such is, yeah, it's cross-platform. Anybody can use it. Doesn't need a VPN. Whereas in the web browser, but at least the last time I checked, both sides can't control. Skype, similar, but no control. And also another thing to point out is just because something has a green check mark across the board doesn't mean it's awesome. Like Join Me or TeamViewer. It's cross-platform. No seems to punch through VPNs. They have Log Me In definitely as or Join Me is definitely a web browser thing, and they allow two-way control. Well, just because that's all there doesn't mean, like I can add lots of columns. Is it kind of slow? Kind of slow. Does it look kind of crappy? Yeah, it kind of looks kind of crappy. Pretty low fidelity, but gets you up and running fast. And if you're only going to be pairing for like an hour, you don't want to spend an hour doing setup. And I'm recommending a few things here. The one up there, I'll show you a blow-up of it in a sec. One on the top is the built-in screen sharing for a Mac. If you're on a Mac, then you have this on your computer. You may not know it. I'll show you where it is. It is based on VNC. That isn't so important, except unless you're going to do some cross-platform stuff, then you can connect to other things that are built on what's called VNC. And it does require a VPN, though. And it doesn't run in a browser, allows two-way control, and it's super fast. It's the best one I've ever found. I've tried a million of them. It's the fastest. When you have a fast network, it's the fastest. iChat works pretty well if you're on a Mac, but it's proprietary. And Join Me works a lot like Log Me In and a lot like the other web browser-based sharing things. They're probably all based on the same thing. People ask me, I don't have this screen sharing thing built into my Mac. I don't see it in Spotlight search when I search for it, and it's not in my application directory. And the answer to all those is, you're right, except that you do have it, and it's in this really weird place, and now you know. Why it's there beats me. Spotlight does not find this. You're right. You have to configure Spotlight to look here. I have no clue why this is in this weird place, but it is, and now you know where it is. Here's the rant I promised. It's very common when I talk to people about remote pairing that I'll say remote pairing comes up in conversation, and they'll say, I do remote pairing too. I'm like, oh, cool. What do you use, right? I want to know. And they say, I use Skype. To which I say, oh, you're not remote pairing. So we've all heard it takes two to tango. Well, it takes a pair to pair. Yes? Skype with a VPN plugin. Does that allow both sides to control?
Yeah.
Oh.
This was several years ago, so it gave you. In fact, I had a problem because when there was a delay, then I was going to alt-tab over to look something up, but I was alt-tabbing the remote.
Oh, interesting. So maybe there are some plugins that make Skype work.
We still have a lot of issues.
Right. But I mean, most commonly, you make a Skype call. There's a menu option that says share my screen, and that's how they share. And when you watch, like in the Olympics, they have that pairs figure skating. What that's not is one person skating and the other one watching them on TV. So and the thing that's really sad to me is is, as you saw, there's a million options for screen sharing that allow two-way control. All this web browser stuff, if you're both on a Mac, there's options there. If you're both on Windows, there's desktop screen sharing there. Lots of options. So I highly encourage you that if you want to do remote pairing, to choose one of these options that lets both sides control. Because the real benefit of remote pairing, of pair programming in general, is having both people have a seamless, instant access to the code without swapping, ownership back and forth and that kind of thing. Reduce the overhead of actually having both people pair. So here's the new kid on the block, even though it looks like the old kid on the block, which is generally, people usually mean tmux in this situation. It's a pretty geeky thing. It's shared SSH sessions or shared SSH session. And what that means is that you're using this terminal or text-based thing to connect to somebody else's computer and you're sharing a terminal session in this way. And if that doesn't make sense, then you're probably not in an environment where this is easily enabled. Who's like Teams are on a Windows-only environment? Fewer than I thought, 25%, 30% or so. Okay. This is not a very easy option for you if you want to do this. But it has some benefits. It's crazy fast, really fast, about as fast as you can get. There's actually some newer stuff that makes it even faster, which is awesome. It's really good for things like Vim and Emacs, if you're familiar with that. If you're not, good for you. If you are familiar with it, it's great for these. These are text-based editors, basically, or terminal-based editors. They're popular in certain programming communities, particularly Ruby. They're best for low bandwidth connections. When I was describing New York's bad network. Luckily, we're doing Ruby, and this was an option. And the way you interact with this piece of software, you find yourself missing it in other situations. It's kind of addictive. It's pretty cool. But it's not all great. It requires SSH access, which usually means like a VPN. There's an overhead to learning like one more thing. Like tmux has its own commands going on, and they interfere with other things, and it's just like one more thing to learn. You very well might need desktop screen sharing to get your job done. So we do primarily web development, and to see the browser together, we're going to have to do something like this. And if you're using iOS or Java or .NET, you're out of luck. And that brings me to rant number 2. And this may not be quite the right community for it, but we'll do it anyway. If I'm looking on Twitter in particular, and I look for pair programming, I see people say, who uses, what should I use for pair programming, remote pair programming? And the answers are often like tmux and Vim. And that's great if you are in an environment that supports that. But sorry, Ruby people. This is a chart by, it's cut off up there. Don't memorize all this. I'll just skip right to this. This is a yearly report that comes out that shows the popularity of programming languages based on this company that analyzes millions or billions of lines of code. And up there at the top is C, which I don't know if C uses IDEs. Do people know what IDE is? It's a windowing, powerful development environment thing. Up there, we've got Java, Objective-C, C++, C#, PHP. We all know those people don't pair. Then Visual Basic. So like, who in the room works in an environment that is primarily one of these things? Java, Objective-C, Visual Basic, .NET technologies. This is like 75%.
That's a different Visual Basic, but you got Visual Basic .NET farther down.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, Visual Basic.NET. Maybe it's not down there, but zoom, it's coming up fast. So if you're talking to people who say, what should I do with pair programming? They say Vim and tmux. Well, 75% of you are out of luck. And there's my precious Ruby number 10 down there. That's screen sharing stuff. Yeah, I think we have about 10 minutes or so left, so just to give you some time. But yeah, please go.
For Visual Studio, my team is trying right now a new tool that we found. I think it's called VS Share. So
VS.
it's like kind of like a plugin.
Oh, right.
You share and use a two-way communication
Right.
And it's working pretty good so far.
Yeah. So you bring.
We're still trying out.
Okay. So you bring up a class of thing I didn't really describe because one, I forgot, and two, I've never used it. And that is some of these IDEs, like Visual Studio that you just mentioned, Eclipse has them too, have these plugins that actually enable remote pairing built into the IDE. So rather than sharing your computer, desktop, you're sharing your development environment. And there's a lot of stuff happening in that area. And there's some interesting things about keeping all that stuff in sync when you have two people actually editing and such. So I'm interested to hear more about your experience with that because I think it's a up and coming area in this screen sharing or code sharing. Yes? Apologies. Yes, go ahead.
I've been experimenting with, you were talking about your broadband at home having a slow output.
Yes.
We've been experimenting with using like Amazon Web Services, having that be the environment that two remote people are working on.
Yeah, I've heard this as well. So using a middleman, so to speak, like something like an Amazon server to host that you set up independently and have both people connect to that and use it as this middle thing. And I've never done that, but I've heard of people doing that as well.
One of the painful things for me is as a Mac user, and I want to use like VPN or a Linux server, but it actually works a little better if you're using a Windows server and then you remote back.
Interesting. So remoting into Windows.
There that's not still.
Yes. So using a Windows server for that is better, you're saying.
Well, it's just a little faster and a very known thing you want to do.
Okay.
Did you ever have issues with lag between hitting the key and seeing the result when you're driving on a mobile computer?
So do I have a lag as I'm typing and not seeing my stuff right away? Or does the other person? The answer is yes, and this is where I would say that's that loss of fidelity thing. Sometimes it isn't as fast, and this is something I don't talk about here because there's fewer developers in the room, but when I'm talking to developers, a frustration or a challenge of remote pair programming is that if you're a really fast developer, you're like a speed demon. You know, like I'm not as fast as some of these people. Like some people are just like crazy fast developers. They can be frustrated by this because there's always a little bit of lag, and they may have problems with that.
So Tim Ottinger told me several years ago that he was pair programming remotely every day. He said that they found it worthwhile to switch the hosting computer when they changed routers because of that.
Interesting. So one technique could be to switch who's driving, or switch the host computer, depending on who's driving. I could see that working. I would be concerned. I've never done that, but I would be concerned with like the overhead of doing that every time and people not wanting to do it.
That was less of a problem when you're getting in a real tight TDD cycle. When you run the test every 10 seconds or something.
Right. Tight TDD cycles would be inhibited by constantly switching the host. Right. Yes. Oh, right. That's a good point. So I do. We will, if the internet is super laggy, turn video off, and turn off other things that might be using the internet as well. So yep, we'll do that. I think we have less than 5 minutes to go, which is okay. Hit me with questions. Most of it from here on out is just extra stuff, extra thoughts I have. Other than like video conferencing, I'm just going to kind of blow through this. Why do I use Skype? Raise your hand if you do not have a Skype account. One person doesn't have Skype. That's the reason why we tend to use Skype, because everybody has it. And there might be some great solutions back here, and I've used all of these, except for the Microsoft one. But everybody has Skype. So I've decided to be as no Skype for all its warts and everything as well as possible. Oh yeah, so if you have access to hundreds of thousands of dollars, you can do cool things like this. If somebody wanted to buy me this, I would not say no. This is from Cisco. I'm just going to buzz through this real quick. So this is my home, but like I said, our offices are built the same way. Big computer, a laptop, or an iPad for Skype. iPad is still kind of in progress. This is that snowball microphone for external conversations. This is particularly important to me as a remote person for the office to have, so that I can hear what's going on when people sidle up to the computer and say, hey, I want to talk to you guys. We use both. Those are some speakers, headsets do. And there are some techniques, I didn't want to get into configuration and stuff like that, but you can configure your machine such that, like when you pop out the headset, it switches to this external setup. You pop the headset back in, and it switches back to the headset. I have some blog posts I can share with you. Maybe I'll add them to this before I upload it. But there are some ways to kind of train your computer to switch seamlessly. Long-term remote pairing. I could go into this. I don't know if many of you are going to be doing long-term remote pairing. Maybe I'll just kind of buzz through super quick. People have any more questions before I go on? Thoughts? Yes? How do we decide who's pairing? The short answer is we switch every day. So everybody gets equal opportunity to pay the Joe tax, as I call it, which is the overhead of pairing with me. So yeah, we just switch every day. Our story granularity is usually small enough that we don't have stories that take days and days and days, just the way we do it. So usually there's a clean breaking point by the end of the day, and we switch the next day. Yes? The team size when doing pairing in general. It really depends. My personal, but speaking from Pivotal's point of view, the size of the projects we typically take on tend to be one pair projects to up to 10, or to up to like 5 pairs, like 10 people. There's a lot, I'm not an expert in this area, but there's a lot of group dynamics and team structure, practical research and theory about team size and everything. And I think that the keynote might have talked about groups of people over like over 8, and you start to get all this overhead and things like that. So when we have projects that need more people, we break them down into smaller groups. 0 minutes, that's it. I was just going to throw one last thing. People are always like, oh my God, robots. Joe, you need a robot. But I don't know, it's kind of creepy. All right. Please fill out your surveys that are on your desk before you go. And if you're so inclined, hit this URL and click a button and tell me what you think. I'll take any feedback, all feedback. Thank you.